Ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry, and I'm speaking today with author, filmmaker, business person, philanthropist, John Murphy, about his new book, American Incendiary Populism, how a California governor and the district attorney who became Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. John, I've known you for a long time, and the basis of this book is something on which you have undoubtedly become the foremost expert. Tell us a little bit about the backstory behind this, and then I want to get right into why you think this is pertinent to today and how and why we must defeat Donald Trump at the polls.
I came across this story when I was painting a house when I was an undergraduate in Santa Clara, California. I was going to San Jose State. And I was speaking with a homeowner who was a friend of a friend who got me the job, and told me about this event in downtown San Jose that had 5,000 to 10,000 people participate in a lynching. This was like in
1933.
No, but that year when I heard about it, it was like 68 or 69. And then I did some research and went to the library and did all the microfiche readings and sort of collected the story on it. And then I went to work. I ran a community mental health program that I started when they closed down the state mental hospital throughout California. But where I was going to school, they have 1,800 former Agnew State mental hospital patients within a mile of the campus with nothing going on for them. And I started a program, got a faculty position, and had a couple hundred students a semester going into board and care homes doing socialization and advocacy. And then out of that, I joined the principal founder of the University of Phoenix and worked there for 20 plus years. Resigned in '97 before it went off the rails as far as I was concerned. But we were the first to have an accredited online program that I helped develop, which I was responsible for accreditation. And then after that, I think what got me motivated about the film was when George W. Bush got elected and went into Iraq and Afghanistan, and it just on a made-up subterfuge to basically fund all the military-industrial complex to the loss of lives of a million Iraqis and Afghanis and 5,000 or 10,000 American soldiers. And I wrote a script based on my research called Valley of the Heart's Delight, which is what Silicon Valley used to be called when it had like literally 10 million fruit trees and 70 canneries back in the turn of the century into the 30s.
I remember the film got quite a good deal of press and was widely praised, and it had quite an incredible cast.
Pete Postlethwaite played the principal character, Gabriel Mann, Diana Scarwood, Bruce McGill, who's a very well-renowned character actor, probably best known for Animal House. He played the character in that. And Tom Bauer, who's a sort of a classic a bit actor, and Emily Harrison, who was her first starring role. And we won a couple of awards. We won Best Cinematography at Boston International and a Silver Remy at Houston World Fest, which is pretty good for the first time out. And I can say, honestly, that I broke even after violating every law of filmmaking, which is you write the script, you spend your own money, and you make it a period piece.
But for a lot of people, that was the first time they had heard of this story, and many people couldn't believe that it was based on a real factual event, which is known as the last lynching in California. And I know that you've written a book about it. The movie came out to wide acclaim. But in the last 6 months, I know we've been talking about this, why you see more and more a parallel between the actions of that, specifically the governor of California, Sonny Jim Rolfe, who was a former mayor of San Francisco, and what he did that you think has paved the way for Donald Trump.
Well, he's basically, if I can show this is added this to the Pulitzer Prize winning cartoon that's on the cover of the book of Donald Trump pointing toward this governor. They're kindred spirits. And the unbelievably terrifying danger that we're facing now is much like the innocent lynch victims faced under the hands of the California governor, and that Trump is fabricating an entire story about the sanctity and the probity of the voting process with absolutely no facts to support it whatsoever, and has marshaled at the same time a very dangerous group of people that show up bearing dangerous weaponry at demonstrations on civil rights related to some of the police deaths of Black citizens. And what's going on now with Trump in this parallel is that the consequences of this are deadly. This is how Hitler came to power, how Mussolini came to power, is creating sincere doubts among the true believers about the inherent corruption of the system, despite all the facts to the contrary. His followers, in the main, I think, tend to believe, are sort of very critically minded when it comes to anything he says, really just like the idea that he thumbs his nose at the status quo in power, which I don't blame him. I'm not that happy about it either. But the danger back then, the attorney went to these two men that were accused of this kidnapping and murder, called the governor and he said, please call out the troops. He not only refused, he said he'd pardon anybody convicted of the lynching. That immediately got in the newspapers, and just like the newspapers today, widely spread it everywhere on the radio. The day after that announcement, 5,000 to 10,000 men, women, and children showed up in a park in downtown San Jose to watch the storming of the jail and then lynching these two guys, who I've determined, based upon my research in this American Incendiary Populism, were innocent beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, they were just fundamentally innocent, but the power of the press, very uncritical of what the governor was doing at the time. They had 200 reporters, photographers, and newsreel cameramen showed up at this thing to watch it, to document it. And the following accounts of it, even though they knew who was behind it, they marred the faces of people that appeared in the photographs and on the videos and didn't name anybody. And when they were looking, because the ACLU got involved, to find out who was behind it, they completely ignored the role of the governor and a local vigilance committee that everybody knew, and instead blamed it on citizens that were rightfully outraged at this really despicable act that occurred, and literally on the street at the busiest time of night when this guy was kidnapped. And they suspended all disbelief. And it's not unlike, there's a movie called The Oxbow Incident, which is a similar thing about these guys that get lynched, that the conviction in your own mind, made up of your own sort of imaginings, is always far more vicious than if you knew the facts, because it allows you to do anything. And if you know the facts, that forces you to contemplate, to think about it, to reflect, and assume responsibility. When it's a large mob, there is no responsibility. And that's the danger of what's going on now with Trump. They're sending poll watchers in. He's pretty much just endorsed the Proud Boys. He's blaming it on an illusory group that has no head, no meaning, no liturgy, nothing, called Antifa, which is a bunch of people that are and I agree with them, are basically anarchists. They're not adding anything to the mix. And I absolutely believe that civil disobedience has to be protected, but people who burn, loot, and commit violence have to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. It has nothing to do with the rights of people and how people are treated in a society.
Right. When Governor Rolfe did this back in 1933, do you think he was aware of what he was doing?
I don't think so. He'd been mayor of San Francisco between 1912 and 1931. He was a tool of basically the Southern Pacific Railroad, which ran politics in California. And a very good friend of his, he lived in Santa Clara County next door to the most powerful attorney who represented the Southern Pacific Railroad, which seems silly now because the railroad just doesn't have the place it used to, but then was a major transportation device, freight movement of people and product and so forth. And it was basically an inside political arrangement that went on. And they picked the sheriff who facilitated the lynching, and they knew everybody in town. And including the media went right along with it. The media, I mean, the day after the lynching, the San Francisco Chronicle sold 1.2 million copies, twice as normal production. So and the newsreels went everywhere, and they generated an enormous amount of money. Now Trump has been taken on two fronts here. One, he's creating danger and doubt in the minds of voters, but the other thing is he's scaring voters half to death because of the COVID and threatening that people go to vote that they're going to pick up the virus. And then he's going through the charade he's just been in the last couple of days, which is just absolutely astonishing. He's making the White House a petri dish. It's like they're on a cruise ship, all locked in there. One after the other of his staff are falling to this illness, and I don't know what he's doing. It's so beyond belief. Just like it was to have the governor said he'd pardon anybody back in '33, but the morning after the lynching, he came back and said, "I still would pardon him." So
yeah, the thing that is interesting is that Donald Trump every day seems to flout some new norm that makes us almost forget the one before. Do you believe that this is how he consciously deflects, that he just keeps piling on so we forget the latest outrage and only focus on the new one?
Well, I think so. And if you take an example, he's nominated a woman to the Supreme Court who's a devout Catholic member of a religious group who claims that she won't apply her religious beliefs to any decision of the court. And in fact, clearly I think she will. And then you look at Trump as an example, that he's pro-life allegedly by nominating this woman. At the same time, he's exhibiting what I call depraved indifference toward the 200 and some thousand citizens who've died. And that's the basis for manslaughter charges. So he doesn't give it, in my mind, a damn about life. He's now claiming that he was saved by medicine when the treatment he's gotten, and I don't wish him ill as far as anything that would happen physically, but virtually none of the 207,000 people who died had any kind of access remotely to that kind of treatment or care.
Right.
So it's a rich man's device. It's another slap in the face in his true believers, I think. So I think, he knows exactly what he's doing, and he doesn't care. I think he's really motivated. He's got so many lawsuits and pending criminal charges that will come into effect if he loses, and once he leaves office. I mean, he's got more going on there. If he stays in office, he has another 4 years of basically immunity. They'll never get to him. I think that's really the driver of a lot of it.
Right. Now, it has been said over the last few years that Donald Trump kept on his bedside table history of authoritarian leaders, Hitler and Mussolini and whatnot. Leaving aside the fact that some people think he doesn't read, do you think indeed he really has studied the past of such authoritarians? Or for instance, like this story, the story of Sonny Jim Rolfe and what he did. Do you think he has studied the past for what he is doing now to govern?
He's probably studied in passing. He was in a military school, in high school, and he probably picked up some of that connection there, I would think. I think in terms of his utter lack of a manifested lack of knowledge of history and people in place and all the other dynamics that affect the decisions of a president are clearly not part of his bookshelf in his head. I mean, I don't think he's read any book ever, really a full book, since he was in college. And if you read it even then, he's always building on an illusion of one thing on top of an illusion of another. You just keep it moving. And basically what's gone on is he's turned his business practices inside out. This is how he ran his practices, his real estate business. If you read anything about that, he'd always hold back 10% of the payment to all these small vendors, and then put the pressure on them and get them to settle for pennies on the dollar. Right. And that's what he's doing with the American electorate. The same thing.
John, you were prophetic during the last election. I know that I thought there was no way that Donald Trump could win. What was it about that last election that you seemed to know he was going to win. What was it that made you think that? Your years from working with the University of Phoenix, your years as a writer, a researcher, what was it that you made you think he's going to pull it off? And do you think he really pulled it off honestly?
For one thing, he tactically did things very well. He went to the states that the Clinton campaign ignored, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and picked those up. I mean, he won those states by 0.23% or 0.45%. 76 or 78,000 votes in the Electoral College made the difference. And that was done, with his business acumen. They kind of did it actuarially, looked at the case of it. I think the other thing is you examine who are the people that are supporting him, and they're basically, which is an outgrowth of a lot of the Republican Party, they're people that every time they see someone they imagine as a special interest group or a minority group obtain something, they think that they're losing something rather than gaining something. And that has gone on now for generations. I mean, ever since the post-industrial age in the 70s, when all the big corporations left the US because they didn't want to have to support and pay the kind of, the costs that were associated with long-term employees and all the pensions and healthcare and all that. And they all left, and they blame it on government regulation, which is nonsense. It's pure greed. And you look at the amount of money they keep offshore. And I think the Citizens United thing was another factor in it when that passed. And although the Republican Party demands to know the identity of every voter, in Citizens United, they're allowed to remain anonymous as to who's giving the money to support this thing. And the Republican Party over the last 10 years has gerrymandered virtually every district. They're small in number in comparison to Democrats and independents, but they've been able to carve out these congressional and districts in such a way that you can never get them out because they're all Republican voters and are never going to change. So it's basically, it's like Trump is mirroring his own soul as his supporters are. They're claiming, he went in saying, "I'm draining the swamp." They are the swamp. They are the black water dumping into it. He brought in nothing but lobbyists and other people they're supposed to get rid of. I just read a thing in the New York Times this morning about the coal industry. He claimed he saved it. He hasn't. It's gone. It's virtually disappeared. As well, it should because of the climate issues. But I think you just take that in the sense of people's deep unhappiness, and you have the highest number of suicides and drug deaths are like white men between 45 and 54. That's a sign of deep, profound desperation, sadness, anger, and fear. That's just came out. They get locked in a hole, and Steve Bannon and company showed up and blame it on the immigrants. I mean, to have that, America's been the beacon for freedom for every country in the world since its founding, and all of a sudden we're slamming the door in their faces, which I just find utterly outrageous. This country is great because of that amalgam of talent and difference of viewpoints and skills that accrue when you bring in so many people from so many different countries.
So John, in our last few moments, talk to me about what you think is going to happen in the next 28 days. It's hard to believe that this year, 2020, has flown by in kind of a haze of COVID. There are whole months I can't seem to remember taking place. And now we are less than a month out from arguably, although it's always said to be the most important election in US history, but this one seems to be to a lot of people something that could absolutely change our form of government. Do you think it's that dire if Donald Trump wins?
It's dire because what's going to happen in the Supreme Court if Amy Coney Barrett gets appointed. It's already on the table now. They're talking about getting rid of, the same-sex marriage as a constitutional right. I mean, all those things really animate the base. That's all they care about. The big PACs that own the senators, the Republican senators, lock, stock, and barrel, and most of the congressional thing, are going to stand by him, and there's nothing they won't do to debase themselves in terms of their own morality and alleged beliefs to get those issues of getting rid of Roe v. Wade and some of the other things that just appall them to no end. I think mail-in ballot applications are up astonishingly high. I mean, they're up like 150% in some instances. If the Democrats realize that they're really in a street fight here, and I think slowly they're doing that, unlike what happened with Bush v. Gore, where they didn't fight like James Baker had the Republicans fight, and then the Supreme Court gave a really bogus finding and appointed Bush president. I think that people are so, if nothing else, they're exhausted by Trump. They're exhausted by the sideshow, the embarrassment, what they have to explain to their kids at the dinner table when they see Trump behave as he's, like a spoiled third grader at the debate. His dalliances with, porn stars and paying bribes, and his foundations, his phony universe. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And that's all going to come home to roost. And I think people are just, I think are fundamentally, I believe people are decent and honest, at least 51% of the time. It goes back and forth depending on its time in history, but by and large, people are. And you try to appeal to their better nature. And I think I'm very optimistic that he'll be voted out. And I think his ridiculing the military is going to end up with them going in there and carrying him out on a hoisting him on his own petard right out the door of the White House. I hope. I think they will. They're not going to put up with it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you're optimistic. I do want to close with something we were talking about before we started recording. And right now you're speaking to me from Northern California, right in the midst of the fire zone. You are actually speaking from a friend's house because you've had to evacuate how many times during this fire season, you and your wife?
Well, we've been since 17, the first fires, the Tubbs fire, we've evacuated 3 times. This one was the most serious in the sense that we live on a lane in St. Helena that's a little north of the city. It's got wineries on both ends, and it's between the only major thoroughfares up here, Silverado Trail and Highway 29. And we left to get a nixle, which is their warning notice at like 4:20 in the morning, Sunday morning. And we were out of there, within an hour, packing, we planned for this. And then for a week, they closed the roads on both sides of it. You can see the fires up in the hills on both sides. The firefighting crews, CAL FIRE, and all the other cities that collaborate together are an astonishing group of human beings that have more dedication and really embody the best of this nation. And that's what we need to do to fight COVID. We have to all come together. And I want to say this about the people, the anti-mask wearers. They are the ones that have the power to put an end to this. And we need their sense of independence, their patriotism, their rock ribbonness, their hard-headedness, and apply it to this pandemic so we put an end to it. And we have to embrace them, not excoriate them, and not allow them to be manipulated by Trump for selfish political and financial purposes. So,
very wise words from John D. Murphy, filmmaker, author, most recently of the pamphlet book, American Incendiary Populism, about the California governor and district attorney who became Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, both of who allowed the last lynching in California. John, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. I look forward to seeing you again soon when we can do so in person.
Thanks so much, David. It's a pleasure. Ahoy.